Okay. Well, thank you, Ross, and thank you for inviting all of us here to be in two places at once. Turns out it's possible. Here we are in Hobart and wherever we are at the same time. I've just got to turn off something that will keep being annoying, which I've now done. Isn't it good that we can just turn off things that are annoying, just like that? But look, more seriously, two things. I want to say how pleased I am that, that Hobart has taken up the sutras as a year-long project of raising consciousness, raising these astonishing matters that we can chant almost on automatic pilot for years. But to raise them to greater consciousness is a wonderful decision, especially since there's going to be, as I know I've heard, sharing across time between these talks so that you can really explore what is raised in each talk further. The other thing I want to do, given the events of last night in this world, is to dedicate this talk and this series of talks to all those who have to live under falling bombs and missiles. Everybody in that situation, perhaps particularly those in Iran who are living between a rock and a very hard place with almost nowhere to move, with decisions taken by others. Decisions is almost too flattering a word for the way this war has commenced. So I want us to hold that in our hearts as we examine what is at stake in the liturgy that we practice, we follow, we take up, we adopt, we make our own, we make it part of our own bone structure in time. So today I'm really taking up the first stage of our family style liturgy, and it is derived from what was practiced in the Sanbo Kyodan, the Three Treasures lineage in Japan. It's taken further, excuse me, taken further and somewhat, of course, in the transition from Japanese to English, in the hands of both Yamada Koan and Robert Aitken. It has become pretty much what it is today. There have been a series of little adjustments over time, but also local sanghas sometimes make their own slight family style adjustments to the way they hear and receive the sutras. Liturgy itself is quite an interesting word. It comes from the Greek liturgia, and that actually means public working. So there's something very active in something called a liturgy. It activates something in us. It starts to rearrange us. It works inside us. So the service we perform together, that's another meaning of the word liturgy, a service performed together. So much of Zen practice is spent, in a sense, in silence, alone, but profoundly together. What happens when we take up one shared voice? One shared voice, and not just finding any old note, but sharing one note, one register of sound. There's actually a number of things happening here. One is that all our voices become one, which is itself a kind of activation of some particular energy of communality, of Sangha, indeed, but also a sense of that sound, although it carries profound meaning, the words carry meaning, but the sound itself is an energy that resounds through us. So there is that. There's also the beautiful way, which is echoed in every part of formal Zen conduct, the conduct of Zen form, indeed. And that is the etiquette of everything moves together. There's not a whole series of individual choices endlessly arising. No, everything moves together. And this is a reflection of the way that the entire biosphere lives, works, and endlessly comes alive. Everything moves together. And so the context of this remark, that very phrase was uttered by an old man close to the end of his life. He'd been living in a little kind of cottage on the edge of a monastery, and the teacher would sometimes come to visit him and sit on their little veranda and talk. And one time he came just to have a cup of tea with this old, almost semi-invalided member of the Sangha. And the old man was in tears. And the teacher touched his arm and said, "What is it? What is it?" The old man pointed to the wind moving through the trees and the individual leaves, and the clouds moving with that, and the birds moving with that, and everything moving. He said, everything moves together. And he was astonished. And he was, in a sense, brought alive, brought awake by that realization. He awakened into everything moves together. But at the same time, the words of the liturgy, they scrutinize us individually. They look back at us as we commit to taking them in and sounding them in our own mouths. We make them personal, even as we do this. They become part of us, part of our bone structure in time. And at the same time, these words resound across many, 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 many centuries, indeed millennia, especially the ones in the opening stage of our liturgy. Let me take you to an encounter I once had in the Sanjay Gandhi National Park just out of Mumbai, or right on the very edge of Mumbai. I was taken there by a friend, and we met up with a guide. It was fairly close to closing time, so we had to move at considerable speed through the Canary Caves. Now, this is one of the oldest and most remarkable Buddhist remnants in India. The Canary, Kanheri, Canary Caves. This is a park in which leopards still roam. In fact, they also roam the garbage bins of the surrounding suburbs. So it's a wild place, it's a forested place, and in the middle of it, carved into the rock itself, is this whole series of I forget the actual number, we didn't get to them all, we couldn't possibly, but something like 50 or 60 carved caves, hand-carved by people, into the rock. They're quite astonishing. They range from, they are dated in time from 1st to 3rd century BCE. And they include a kind of university. It was called a university at one point, a Buddhist university. So we actually sat together on the benches of the university. They're carved rock benches, carved out of the actual rock itself. There are very large Buddha figures. There are pillars that are magnificently decorated, pillars carved. How they did this is a great marvel. But the most marvelous moment of all was when we were sitting there in that university cave, when the guide began to chant in Pali what we chant in Pali. He chanted, Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sambuddhasa. And I joined in. So we went on to chant the three refuges as well in Pali, because they were ingrained in my bones too, from years of chanting them. So that was a moment where time joined up and places joined up. Again, we're in two places at once. I was sitting in a dojo in Australia and in the Kanheri caves, and in the 21st century and in the 1st century, all at once. So that's the way these sutras work. They link us deeply to the tradition that has carried, and it has been carried carefully, consciously, passed from hand to hand, warm hand to warm hand, across time. So that's why the languages in our sutras include Pali, one or two Sanskrit words, particularly in titles, of course Sino-Japanese, and English. So a significant portion of Japanese vocabulary known as kanji, that was borrowed from the Chinese, particularly between the 5th and 9th century. So there is this overlap period linguistically between China and Japan. And these kanji represent a substantial part still of the Japanese language. And you'll find those characters, if you have a rakusu, sometimes known as a rocket suit, you'll have them on the back of your own rocket suit. You can look at them and appreciate the fact that they come as a kind of connective tissue between China and Japan, just as Chan became Zen. Again, one long connective tissue of taking care, of being aware of awakened reality and deeply, deeply desiring to wake up into that. So I'm going to be confining myself today to the first page of the sutras, except I'm not completely confined, because I'd just like to first mention the shape as a whole, how the sutra liturgy pattern as a whole works. The first part I will be talking about in some detail, the way we come in clean. That is, we come in through a threshold, an entry point, in which we, in a sense, a kind of moment of formalized acknowledgement and washing. If you think about, if you've ever taken part in on entering or on leaving the land here, where I am in Yuan country, right here, you'll remember the formalized form of washing of the hands to signify nothing left behind, everything acknowledged, everything entering in clean, clear. That's followed by the acknowledgement of well, the veneration of the Buddha in Pali, the one I just chanted. And then the three treasures of Buddhism. Buddha, awakening; Dharma, the law; also reality itself and every form within it, awake; and Sangha, which is the vast net of interbeing, the vast net of beings and mutual relationships. The word mutual, the tissue of mutuality, is the key thing here, the essential matter. The fact that we live in mutual relationship with every single thing there is. Then there's the plunge into emptiness with the Heart Sutra, the great Prajna Paramita Heart Sutra. The explanation by, actually by Avalokiteshvara, of emptiness itself. She reports it to the listening Buddha, and that will be explored by someone at some point in detail. But the point is, where it leaves us is swimming in emptiness. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. That great mystery and yet absolute fact of reality. And so it's followed by almost quickly, to take care of things, it's followed by a dharani. That's a kind of magical or mysterious incantation. It's a kind of prayer in a way, believed to generate merit and provide protection. After all, if you've just plunged into emptiness, you need a bit of backup at that moment. So you have the dharani, which is then followed by the first dedication, the first formal dedication. And this is effectively a communal acknowledgement of indebtedness to long and even timeless lineage of beings. Don't forget, it begins with the ancient 7 Buddhas. One time someone said, who are they? Let's get their names. They don't have names. They have a mysterious kind of lineage of their own. But what this is saying, in a way, is this goes back indefinitely into the vanishing point of time itself. So this resolves into, don't forget, the first dedication ends with the great prajna paramita. So everything that is said in that first dedication then resolves into and is held by prajna paramita, the perfection or completeness, paramita, of emptiness wisdom, of awake mind. And then the second stage of the sutras unfolds, and that you could almost call that the compassion wisdom. Emptiness wisdom followed by compassion wisdom. And of course, they interdepend. Wisdom without compassion is not wisdom. Compassion without wisdom is not compassion. And so, usually at that point, at least in the last 20 years, I think I introduced the Metta Sutta for the first time into the Diamond Sangha. It has taken its place there. So the Metta Sutta, the Buddha's words on loving kindness, which you can listen to every single time fresh, and a different thing, part of that will reach you. I can assure you of this, and the fact that it's offered with a particular sort of slight, almost song-like pattern, not really song, it's just lifts certain words up and further into the light. So it's slightly different from the chant. And we've always adopted, we have tried everybody chanting it together, and it did not reach the heart in the same way as hearing a lone voice offering it. So that's often followed, or sometimes followed or replaced by Torei Zenji's Bodhisattva's Vow, which is going to be taken up later in this process of talks. But why is it there? Well, it is actually taking up and the possibility of transforming even anger coming at you and anger possibly roused in defense as no, do not rouse that anger. Let it open in an extraordinary way and see what appears then. Torei Zenji was beset by anger a lot of his life, and this Torei Zenji's vow is the transformation of anger into the fundamental emptiness wisdom that underlies the true compassion of no self. So it's a drop from anger into no self itself. And no self is boundless. It is boundless compassion with that vast healing freedom that is, of course, taken up by the Kanzeon chant. Again, that's close to prayer because it has a certain invocation in it. It is invoking compassion, loving kindness in ourselves and the recognition of it in all things. It's in a way calling on the name of Kanzeon, which Kanzeon, of course, being the Bodhisattva of compassion. The one who hears and cannot not hear all the cries of the world. And in hearing, the heart responds. So the second formal dedication actually acknowledges mortality and suffering, and it lifts that to freedom as well, letting it also resolve timelessly back into the great prajna paramita, which is then of course followed by the great vows, about which we could easily spend the rest of the whole day talking. So I won't be taking them up at all, but I will leave them to take you up for the rest of your lives. What we have at the opening page of our Zen Open Circle Sutra book are these words: "The sutras are sacred words. Please treat your sutra book with mindfulness and care." And that's itself a way of rousing consciousness about what is it that you're holding in your hands. If you hold them in the formal way that we invite, you actually are holding them as if in gasho, as everybody else is doing, as they recite them without needing the sutra books. So in other words, roused consciousness is the very matter of entering a dojo, and it's the matter of entering the sutras as well. You could say in a way that ritual is consciousness roused, raised, held together. So the opening move is still labeled purification. There has been talk at times of changing this to various other possible words. But let's just look at the word purification. I like the fact that it has remained, because what we're doing in this moment, in the purification moment, as I talked about in terms of the formal washing, rinsing, declaring, I come in clean of any kind of ideas about myself. So this stage of the sutras begins with an acknowledgement of our human, all too human status, humbling ourselves, admitting it freely. It's interesting to look at some of the synonyms for acknowledgement, this stage of acknowledgement. So you could go to admission, as in admitting, allowing, as in saying, yes, this too is me, confession, and that word is actually in the purification part of the sutras. But another word for acknowledgement, of course, is realization. There is actually a move of realization in the very act of saying all the harm and suffering ever created by me. There's a stage of realization in that. There's a kind of opening right there, an opening to look with infinite depth into those very words. Another synonym is awareness, and another one again, knowledge. So all of these things are potential. They're potentiated in this moment. The main other word that has been suggested at times to replace purification is atonement. And but both together, just like purification, both words implicitly acknowledge, in a way they're saying, I must mend my ways. I must mend my heart. Heal my heart. That there's work to be done. Once you now confess openly and fully, there's work to be done. In a way, you're saying, guilty as charged. I too am a source of harm and suffering in this world. Now that's a large statement that, like I said before, the sutra words of the sutras look back at us personally. And this is a very sharp moment of that looking back at us. So atonement carries a possibly slightly more active sense of doing something to mend it, to redeem it, to refine that awareness, and even carries a possibility of salvation. In a way, to save ourselves from that path of harm and doing harm and suffering. And in those words, openly and fully, I now confess openly and fully, that's completely unqualified offer of the self. Complete, unqualified, guilty as charged. I now confess openly and fully. So that all the words that preceded are important. So here are the words. All the evil karma ever created by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, hatred, and ignorance, born of my actions, speech, and thought, I now confess openly and fully. Now, there has been debate at times about the words evil karma, and in many places, certainly in Zen Open Circle, and possibly in Hobart, I can't remember what adoption has happened there, but harm and suffering has tended to replace evil karma. Now look, evil is a very important word to Christian and Abrahamic theology. I think why people's hearts are slightly guarded about it is partly it seems to imply an external force. And evil can feel. There can be something like an external force that you can feel rippling through the internet, for example, with hatred, greed, ignorance. There's a sense in which mob violence is an example of an external force of harm at large. What's going on right now in the Middle East can feel exactly like that, an external force. But when we're actually opening ourselves to say, all the harm and suffering ever created by me, we're taking it back to ourselves. We can't count on there being some kind of evil force out there that is at fault and causing us to be at fault in some way, because evil is its own external force. No. So I think the tendency to move away from that word is probably useful. And as for karma, that's very important to the Hindu stream that fed into Buddhism. But karma itself, from a Hindu point of view, is exactly what supports the caste system. The sense that if you are of the lowest of the low, well, that's because of your past actions in other lives. So you can be treated with impunity, mistreated with impunity. So I feel very guarded about the word karma, except to the point where I would say the moment that we recognize harm and suffering created by this one, karma arrives. And it arrives in the sense of shame, of the painfulness of that. Then comes the phrase, since of old, all the harm and suffering ever created by me. Since of old. Since of old is a way of reminding us that this matter goes right back. There's no invitation here to contemplate or, bargain with words like, but that was inadvertent, or, but that was when I was too tiny to know. Even then, there's a sense of, I can remember the moment when I deliberately crushed an ant when I was little. I did it almost like a scientific experiment. It was on my piano, and I decided I would just crush it. Then I remember just feeling terrible. I just had such a sense of why? What is it in me that would do that? Karma arrived in that sense. So sense of old is one part of the wiping away of any kind of bargaining that you can have with yourself. Beginningless takes it even further. On account of my beginningless greed, hatred, and ignorance. Because now we begin acknowledging that our awareness of the harm and suffering we've ever caused can be very subject to our own internal kind of department of public relations and specious justification. And we can find a way to argue ourselves out of acknowledgement of harm and suffering. It can be very quick to come to our defense when we recognize that shame or the intense painfulness of guilt arises. Beginningless is also saying this lies beyond even our conscious cognitive minds. This acknowledgement that harm and suffering is being caused beyond deliberate conscious choices being made. So it's very unqualified and full, it's comprehensive in what it is saying. So, in a way, the word beginningless is also sort of saying that we forget or we remember as if in a dream. Our memories are themselves something like a creative force, like dream itself, but also a kind of sieve. So much falls through that sieve. It's like trying to carry water in a sieve, which, by the way, was what the Vestal virgins, who are going to be women who are going to become in charge of the temple as Vestal virgins, they were commissioned with having to carry water in a sieve to prove their holiness in some form. But this sense of beginningless, hold it in your heart, because what it's really acknowledging is that there will actually, just by walking, you can snuff out life. Just by driving a car, you are adding to the fate of the earth. Just by the way that we are stitched into a so-called civilization with its own mind, its own forms of harm and suffering that are legion. And let's look at that in the next phrase. We come to, on account of my beginningless greed, hatred, and ignorance. Now, these are the three poisons of mind that inhibit awakening: greed, hatred, and ignorance. So when we look at the world as at large, we see greed is rampant. It's the very business plan of our civilization. It's driving all of the decisions that are driving climate change. It's driving the almost unreadable threat of AI upon our lives. It's imposing suffering on all of those who must do without but look on without. All of those suffering hunger and immiseration. They are the victims of shared greed that goes beyond and is given license in our world. Our civilization licenses greed. So what is the close friend of greed? The close friend of greed is generosity in outward form, and in inward form, let's look at the word oryoki, the formal meal, contemplative meal service that we have in Sesshin. Oryoki means just enough. So those two, outward generosity and inward awareness of just enough. It's not about self-deprivation. It's not about harming life, even your own. It's not about mean-spiritedness. The opposite of greed is not mean-spiritedness or kind of Scrooge-like behavior. It's just enough. Hatred, of course, is readily unleashed. It's rampant right now. And I don't really need to talk about what we all know about, which is the technologized forms of technologized consciousness, social media, AI, places where the sense of the fear of the other devolves so readily to anger and attack. What a pity that we followed the way of the chimpanzee instead of the bonobo. It would be a very different world if the medium of solving, resolving confusion and and any kind of hostility was friendliness. Make love, not war. So the sense of self, when there's hatred is like the sense of self in confronted mode. And when confronted, taking on the sense of self takes on the sort of mode of reinforced concrete. It is absolute, this sense of self. And that's where Linji is so valuable when he said, whatever confronts you, don't believe it. Don't believe it. Whatever leaps up as this belief is that confronted sense of self in reinforced concrete form. So don't believe that. Let that undo itself by whatever means you can find at that moment. Put that immediate belief to one side. And think of the words of the Buddha. Hatred will not cease by hatred, but by love alone. You know, this is the foundational quote from the Dhammapada, the collection of sayings of the Buddha. So the close friend of hatred, of course, is love. Self and other equal. Self and other, in a way, flowing into each other. No gap, or very little. Now, the word ignorance needs a little more special attention. The first two, I think, are plain. They're writ large in us and in the world. We know about them from earliest childhood days. We become aware of them. But ignorance needs special attention, partly because by its very nature we are ignorant of being ignorant. There is that. There's also, we could easily mistake it for I just did not realize, or I did not have all the information yet, or something like that. I was ignorant of X, Y, and Z. So what the word is doing here is actually closer to the sense of delusive thought itself. Self that is sometimes known as disorderly consciousness, the sort that we live in most of the time. So this is fundamental ignorance. This is ignorance of awakened mind itself. It is the simplest way to, in a way, parse and analyze the word is to say a sense of separateness. That is the fundamental ignorance, as a belief, an absolute belief of the separation of one thing from another. And what comes with that is a complete investment in self, the fundamental and first act of separation, this self, this very self. So, the process of the falling away of ignorance is the falling open, dropping into the realization of there is no other. No other. So bodhicitta is in a way the longing, deep, even painful longing to wake up to this. And that is the close friend of this word ignorance, this prison house of self that we call ignorance, of our true nature. So please find this yearning in yourself. Protect it, cultivate it, value it beyond all things, because let it explore you deeply and it will bring you home. Bodhicitta, the desire to awaken, the impassioned desire to awaken. Okay, so the next part speaks of born of my action, speech, and thought. The greed, hatred, and ignorance born of my action, speech, and thought. We can relatively easily discuss actions and speech as the cause of harm and suffering. But what about thought? And here I just want to take a brief excursion into the word integrity. Integrity is an important word in our Zen practice, partly because of how the Confucian-informed point of view that is alive in Zen. Excuse me. The word integrity, it has its root in the sense of that which is untouched, intag, untouched. It's what it's saying is there's something in us, each of us, that we know instinctively when it is breached, when it is unsettled by our actions. It is this live sense in us that is very quiet most of the time, because when it's untouched, it's perfectly happy. It doesn't want mention of itself. Integrity isn't something that you declare about yourself. You can't say, I have integrity. Immediately you don't. So, in other words, we know and we need know nothing about its status at any one point until we lose it, and then we're intensely aware of it. We feel, in a sense, we feel betrayed by ourselves when we lose integrity. And its useful friend, shame. So, two different definitions in the Cambridge University dictionary has, one is the moral principles that you refuse to change, strong moral principles that you stand by and refuse to change. But the other one is the state of being whole and undivided. Undivided consciousness is a way of understanding the body of the Buddha known as Sambhogakaya, the enjoyment body, the quiet, open, easy enjoyment body of the Buddha, aware and at home in the fact that form is emptiness and emptiness is form, that these two are apparently subtly distinct and yet they are not two. That's the enjoyment body, the Sambhogakaya. So that's a way of understanding undivided consciousness. It's awake, mind awake. But it's also a way of, more simply perhaps, of pointing to the need to notice your own mind with some rigorous care at each point. The Chinese word dating back to Confucius, to the Analects, for this word is Cheng. It means observable integrity. Others can see your integrity. Luckily, you don't have to think about it until you lose it. And Cheng is regarded in Confucian terms, as social cohesion itself, the favourite phrase of our government at the moment, social cohesion. In other words, it's a force of social cohesion. It's that which you can count on in each other, that which will, and in yourself, and that which will stay the course, however difficult things are. So, integrity is seen as something that actually brings things constantly to fulfillment in a better, stronger, and more livable state. And it's the very basis of the sense of genuineness in character. When Robert Aiken once asked his teacher Yamada, "What is the purpose of Zen?" Yamada sat for a moment and then he said, "Oh, it is the perfection of character." That is the purpose of Zen, the perfection of character, the complete genuineness of your being. So above all, integrity is that which we know for ourselves. It is inarguable because we know when we breach it. Now I want to give you a really interesting little encounter that brings this home. A leading Confucian scholar known as Zhang was also, by the way, this is the time of Dahui, so it's 12th century, 11th, 12th century China. And Dahui was his Zen master, so this is a Confucian with a strong Zen practice. And he, as a student of Confucianism, was invited by the emperor to sit on the classics mat. That was what it was called, the seat from which you could expound Confucian principles. In a way, delivering a lecture to the emperor. And so the emperor, known as the son of heaven, beyond reach, beyond argument, beyond. So this emperor had declared of himself, he said, "I have achieved a condition of perfect integrity." Whoops. So obviously you can't achieve integrity. It is inborn, and I'd say it subtly continues to develop inside us every time we become even a slightly morally aware. And as I've mentioned, you know it in its breach, the loss of its intact, untouched state. But the encounter goes on like this. Zhang said, "I see that you have this integrity when you are at court addressing your ministers. But what about when you retire to your private quarters?" Zhang, the emperor, said, "I maintain my integrity there as well." Zhang said, "How about when you are with the imperial harem?" The emperor paused and was thinking about how to reply when Zhang suddenly said, "Right now, you have lost your integrity." So just in that pause, as he begins to gather around himself the defensive robes of my integrity, he lost it. I think that's a lovely, instructive encounter. So this thorough sense of sincerity, or Cheng, it's a necessary part of bodhicitta. I want to just bring that point home. This is the sense of your own most irreducible, empty-handed, humble, sincere self can come to the party only that one, can come to the party of awakening. If you come wanting something for yourself, something lovely for yourself, you will find only yourself as it is now. It's a little like the the brag that was on the wall, the lovely playful brag on the wall of the Balmain gym one time. It said, a new body guaranteed, or your old body back again. So this sense here of, let me take you to the words of Hong Zhen. That was the teacher of Huike, the famous sixth ancestor. Hong Zhen said, if beings aren't thorough Cheng, are not thorough Cheng, this sense of unimpeachable integrity that you know nothing about, but you feel in its breach. If you aren't thorough Cheng, thorough genuineness in aspiring to awaken, not even all the Buddhas of past, present, and future will be able to help them. Even if those Buddhas and past, present, and future were as numerous as the sands of the Ganges. So these powerful admission, the powerful admission of the purification, it is the invitation into this sincerity. If undertaken sincerely, it brings us through into a state of Cheng, awareness of Cheng, awareness of the all too easy loss of integrity. It puts us on our toes. We come in a little more awake about ourselves, having walked through the threshold of that first stage. So we are in better state to actually discover this true self. And the next two stages provide the answer to what then? What supports discovery of this true self? And we come to the Namo Tassa. This is a traditional gatha of veneration of the Buddha, recited, of course, in Pali, the original language of Indian Buddhism. The Namo is saying, I venerate, or I hail. And the other terms are words for the Buddha, and they can translate as the sacred one, the great sage, the truly enlightened one, or the Lord, the worthy one, the perfectly awakened one. Now you can externalize that and plant it onto the Buddha on the altar if you wish, but of course it is looking back at you and your awakened self, or the potential of your awakened self. You possess that. The Buddha was an ordinary human being and is making that clear in all the words he had a chance to speak. So when we venerate the idea of the truly enlightened one, we're rousing bodhicitta in that as well. And that is followed then by the Tisarana, the taking refuge. A practitioner of Buddhism acknowledges that I am a practitioner of Buddhism when you take up the three treasures, the Tisarana. And of course we recite them in the Pali to remind ourselves of the earliest Indian source of these refuges. So Buddham saranam gacchami, I take refuge in the Buddha. And that is taking refuge in awake reality. It's asking us to invite ourselves to dare to say, join it, join this awake reality. And then Dhammam saranam gacchami, I take refuge in the Dhamma. I take refuge in the teachings, in the law of reality. Let them say to you, then study them, take them up, study them. I think our tradition, our path, leaves that in your hands a little, doesn't say, get interested in this. Study it deeply. Let it study you deeply. Sangam saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Sangha. Now, of course, this is the community of friends with whom you walk the path. And of course, it is all the network of life, mutual relationships that support your life. And it extends out into the vast field of life itself. One great interconnected Sangha. And to take refuge in the Sangha, the implication here is then enter this vast field of interconnected life. Enter it, take refuge in it, reinforce its spirit and sense within yourself, and thereby enter it more and more fully. And so, I see I've overrun the time a little. I think there's so much in such a few number of words here. I'm not sure, actually, Ross, do we have a bit of time for a bit of feedback now from people, or have we run out of time?
Well, we're scheduled to finish at 11, but we can continue on for a little while.
Okay.
If people need to leave, they can just leave. And the same in the dojo here if they need to leave.
Well, the other thing, of course...
We can still leave it open a bit for...
Okay, I'm happy to do that.
And if you've got time as well.
Yes, I can stay on, that's fine. But I just also want to sort of point out this will flow into the conversation that you will be having in your Sangha discussion, yes, over the next while.
Oh, yes, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, I thought that was the plan, that this would feed. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Well, I cannot but say a few number of words like this have depth in them. It is the very first stage of the process, and it carries a lot more weight than just some formal recitation. The weight in these words is valuable.